everyone. Thank you for being here today. And welcome to all of you on the 15th edition of the SOT events, Guardians of the Future. My name is Sophia Kasuri, and my panel today is on from play to play pedagogies for all ages on behalf of Beacon House. This is a 50-minute discussion, and the last 10 minutes will be for question and answers from the audience. So there are hall managers around you. If you have any questions, please raise your hand. They will give you a paper and pen, and we will try to address as many questions as possible in the last 10 minutes of the session. Without further delay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce the guests we have today. Dr. Ger Graus, a renowned figure in the field of education. He was the first global education director at Kidzania and the CEO of Children's University. He currently also chairs the Beacon House Advisory Board. Dr. Sarah Baker, online. She has a PhD in cognitive science and worked with preschool children in New Jersey. Dr. Sarah has been a professor in developmental psychology and education at the University of Cambridge and is currently a principal investigator in the Center of Research on Play in Education, Development, and Learning. Ms. Penny Tassoni is a well-known author, speaker, and trainer who specializes in the whole spectrum of learning and play. She has written 40 books, many of which are core textbooks in the UK for training nursery nurses and earlier teachers. She works regularly in supporting nurseries in Turkey, China, Dubai, and Hong Kong. Dr. John Blatchford, who's here with us today in Lahore, is an educational researcher and consultant. He is also the founding member for Schema Play, a community interest company that aims to contribute towards an improvement in the learning outcomes of disadvantaged young children and a narrowing of gaps in the educational outcomes that are associated with socioeconomic, cultural, and gender difference. He was also commissioned by UNESCO to co-author an early childhood care and education review for the UNESCO Decade of Education for Sustainable Development and also chaired the ECCE for Sustainable Development Workshop. And again, online, we have Dr. Bo Thompson, who is the chair for Learning Through Play at LEGO Foundation as a senior expert on how children and adults learn through play. He is also a renowned architect, robot designer, and elite researcher at the MIT Media Lab. He advises international organizations such as the World Economic Forum, World Innovation Forum for Education, and the UN General Assembly and governments across the world. Welcome, and thank you all for being with us today. The purpose of this session is to bring together leading experts in education and developmental psychology to discuss the benefits of play in education and understand how playful pedagogies can be integrated in our curriculum. How do we create the best learning experience through quality interaction in meaningful settings that inspire students to be creative, curious, and innovative? The aim is to nurture an intrinsic motivation to self-learning. With that in mind, my first question to the panel, and we can start with Dr. Graus. Dr. Graus, what are the core features of pedagogy of play?
Thank you for the invitation to be here today. It's a privilege to actually be back in Pakistan in person. I'm also probably, amongst my esteemed colleagues, I'm probably the least likely one to be on this panel because my background is I'm a secondary school teacher. So the core principles for me lie around the work that I also do with Reggio Emilia. And it is, in the first instance for me, that when we talk about play and education in the same sentence, that we focus on the child and that we move away from that concept that everything needs to be regulated, everything needs to be dictated, and everything needs to be tested. Because that's the thing that keeps me awake at night, is that we will have authorities that wreck this, because that's what they're very good at. Yeah? And so if we focus on the child and we do not think of the elements of education and play as separate entities, but we think of them as one and as a natural partnership, then I think we have a very good start. In my role at Kidzania, I was very often asked the question, is Kidzania education? Is Kidzania fun? Or is Kidzania play? And every time it is either or. and I never understood the question. Because to me, and John knows Kidzania well, because we spent quite a bit of time together in London, to me it was all three. So I hope that begins to answer some of that question, Sophia. It's about the child, and it's about the focus on it is one and the same thing, rather than treating it as three or more separate entities.
Thank you, Dr. Grouse. John?
Three features I'd really like to emphasize. First of all, play is natural. Secondly, the zone of proximal development. Vygotsky's idea of a zone of proximal development, that's important in play. And the other one is flow. So natural, why is it natural? How is it natural? I mean, it's really good news, isn't it? We are naturally, inherently, a learning species. We learn through play, and that's the mechanism by which we do that. And the bad news, I suppose, is that historically, over the millennia, we've developed this cultural, historical body of knowledge which there isn't enough time in a lifetime to learn it all. So we have an education system that introduces the established cultural knowledge alongside it. So it isn't enough just to learn through play. Serendipity will work, we will learn, but we won't learn everything we need to learn. So the natural bit. Why is it natural? Why do I say play is natural? How is it natural? I think to really understand that, you need to think about what a golden nugget of knowledge actually is. And I like to put people into the position of being a young child and think about something that you don't know about. So I was thinking of something that you might not recognize immediately, so I brought this along. You know, what does it mean to actually develop a knowledge of that, to learn about it? How do you actually tackle that problem? Don't know if the camera's picking it up or not, or whether you can see it clearly. But every object, every idea, every answer to a problem has two parts to it. Every golden nugget of knowledge has two parts. It has the figurative part, what it looks like, what its name is. In this case, it's a protective cover. And it has the most important part, what it does. And in this case, it actually protects an iPhone. So it's the cover for a protected cover for an iPhone. As a species, humanity and many other species as well, learn through the schemes, the operations. What we're interested in is when we approach something new in our environment, what we're interested in, what are the affordances? What can we do with it? What will it do for us? That's the very primary thing that we do. And that's what a child does when they play. They're looking at objects. They don't care what it's called. They don't care what it is. They want to know what they can do with it. And that is what play is. That is how play works. And it's scheme-based. It's about operations, not about schemas. And that's the biggest problem for teachers, because we got used to thinking about curriculum, content. What are the names of things? How do we define it? That's not what play is about. It's about what you do with things first, and then you learn about the names of things. Okay, I had mentioned three things. The ZPD, Vygotsky famously talked about the way an adult could support a child, but in play and in other contexts, by providing a zone of proximal development, a zone in which the child could achieve more than they would be able to achieve all on their own. He also said, and this is much less understood, I think, but promoted by Elkanin and Bodrovin and Long in particular, that play provides the ZPD for children. And the way it does that is because the child uses the schemes, the operations they've already developed when they interact with other objects. So they've already learned how to position things and set things out in a line, and they'll take some new object, regardless of what it is or where it came from, stones, leaves, whatever, and they'll do exactly the same thing. They're using their scheme to scaffold their learning further, and they're finding out what it does. And that's when Vygotsky talked about a child when they're playing is actually standing a head taller than they are when they're not playing. That's what he's talking about. He's talking about how they scaffold themselves and support their learning further. What they need to do is they need to observe and recognize what it is that the child is doing. This prime directive of all education, we have to start with what we know the child already knows, what they can do, and then build on it. If we don't do that, it won't be meaningful to them. So the practitioner in early childhood has to observe the child, and they have to know what are the schemes, what are the operations that they use. Now, luckily, we've got research that has identified many of the most popular schemes that children between 3 and 5 repeat over and over again. There are particular schemes that dominate their play, and they are things like positioning, they're containing, putting things into things and tipping them out. That can be really annoying sometimes, but it's not being naughty. They're learning about containing and how containers work. Then there's trajectories, throwing things, having a fascination with lines that go horizontally or vertically. There's transporting things, carrying them from one place to another. Again, it can be quite infuriating for parents sometimes, but it's a scheme that's repeated over and over again. And a skilled educator can identify what is the dominant scheme that this child is using and add extra resources, extra ideas to the child to actually enrich that and to develop their mathematics and language skills further using that basis. And that's the essence of schema play.
Thank you. Thank you, John. So natural, proximal development and flow is for you the core pedagogies of play. Let's move on to our online panelists. Let's start with Dr. Sarah. What are your core pedagogies of play?
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. It's really exciting to be here, even online. When I think about a pedagogy of play, one of the first things that comes to mind is that there isn't one single definition or one single vision. There's no formula. It will look a little bit different for every situation. But at the same time, we think about play as developing children's inner motivation and also their self-regulation. And so from that point of view, there could be certain ways that teachers or parents can behave that can support that in children, so that can support their motivation and self-regulation. For us, we sometimes talk about pillars, as if like these are the big legs that hold up the building of a pedagogy of play. And the first one is giving children space. The second one is giving them support. And so these are complementary, of course, space and support, finding a balance between those two. The third one is stimulation. And that connects with following children's interest, but also sometimes introducing something new to them and sparking their curiosity. And then finally, when we've worked with teachers, we've found that alongside space, support, and stimulation, the teachers themselves have to take on a position almost as if they are a researcher themselves. So the idea of inquiry, and that the teachers themselves can be playful around their own practice and ask questions and try things out and not be afraid if something doesn't go exactly as they thought it might. So for us, we think about playful pedagogy in principles and not in very specific concrete things you must do.
Okay, thank you. Bo, finally, what about you?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for bringing such an important topic to the conference, and it's Obviously, a very important topic to the LEGO Foundation, the development and learning through play, and something we have seen becoming even more important over the past years with such a number of challenges that are facing all of us, in particular parents and teachers. So for us, play is the optimism, it's the opportunity to express your ideas and thinking. And I think all the examples that are already mentioned illustrates that very well, that we don't see learning and playing as neither nor or separate, but they actually support and strengthen each other. Because when children are engaged in positive, hands-on activities, they not only better understand themselves and others, but they actually test and try out ideas about the world around them. And they develop essential skills, socially, emotionally, physically, creatively, that last not only for the short term in the early years, but actually throughout out life. So we just launched a new review looking at more than 300 studies across 40 countries that describes this relationship between playing and learning. So as was mentioned here in the room, I think there was many great characteristics and examples from practices like Reggio Emilia. For us, the core feature in a pedagogy is that you are able to balance the choice and structure. You give more agency and choice to the child. So traditionally, teaching is thought of as a very instructional practice, but with play, you give more opportunity for guidance, where children have more opportunities to express themselves, or through games, or through more collaborative projects. So it's a movement from a more linear, one way of teaching to a more engaging, joyful way of learning.
Thank you. Do we still have Penny online with us? No, she's okay. Okay. So when we talk about playful pedagogies, what does that bring to the curriculum? And we can start with Dr. Sarah, and we can then take turns.
I'm not entirely sure how to answer this question because you're asking, I guess, what playful approaches can bring to a curriculum. I'm a developmental psychologist, so I often do focus on what's happening with the children when they're learning. And so my answer will be, as a developmental psychologist, I think taking a playful approach to learning brings engaged learners to the curriculum so that they're ready to make that knowledge and those skills their own. And what I mean by that, can I just say, elaborate a little bit on what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. What I mean by that is when some teachers that we've worked with start with a very traditional approach of direct instruction, a lot of structure for their learners. One of the things that they notice as a benefit when they try out a more playful approach is that exactly those learners who were finding it hard, they're the ones who often benefit the most from a playful approach because they're engaged. I mean, they're more able to get interested because they are given some choice about, for example, how they want to show their work at the end. Rather than just telling them, this is what everyone's going to produce, now do it. They might be given the option of presenting to their class or making a post, like doing something very visual, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just an example of how they could be more engaged in their own learning and also still have the content and the curriculum and the knowledge at the same time.
Thank you so much. I think that's something we talked about yesterday as well, where we were talking about neurodiversity and how all children are different and one method obviously does not apply to all, and how play pedagogies will definitely matter in using different techniques with different children so they learn better. Dr. Grouse?
I'd like to perhaps throw some thoughts in the mix here. I think where the play element of things and the curriculum, it's a little bit like, in an ideal world, a marriage. It's where the how and the why meet the what. And I think that's incredibly important, and we need to think about the fact that let's call it the play element, sits around discovery and sits around curiosity and sits around learning and sits about a sense of purpose, which is the why thing. What then happens invariably as children go to school, and we take school more seriously, don't we, as they get older, for whatever reason, is we actually teach the learning out of the child. The focus increasingly on the what and the testing how well we have delivered the what. And the individuality that Sarah, for example, alluded to disappears because we focus on the teaching, top down, the delivery. And actually, I sometimes jokingly say to teachers, when we test the children, we actually don't test the children. What we're testing is how well you've taught the children. It's part of that kind of, we serve the system. So what happens when those children are very young and in their playful learning, we actually serve the child. And there is a switch point. And we need to, and this is a plea, comes not just from me, but from many other people I work with, we need to take what goes on in early years much more seriously and follow it through. And it is one of my very, very few criticisms of Reggio Emilia, is Reggio Emilia applies to the age of 4 as much as it does to the age of 90. But for some reason, we as adults, educators, policymakers, draw that line of schooling versus learning. And I think that, for me, is the key factor. And Ken Robinson, who's a very good friend of mine, also used to say that schools rob children of creativity. I don't know that that's what schools do. I think that's what schooling and what policies do. Just like we teach the learning out of the children. And the microphone lasted all that. How brilliant is that as well?
I have to say I agree with you. I think the standardized testing is what has sort of spiraled us into this pressure of performing, and so it takes away the creativity and the learning aspect for some of us. Dr. Blatchford?
You said the what, concentrating on the what rather than the how or what it does. It's pretty much what I was saying earlier, I think. You know, a child, it's unnatural to think, what is this? What's it called? You want to know what it does. You want to know how it works. And that's how we learn more generally. What are the curriculum implications of play? I'll give you 2 examples, which are probably things that many of you will have struggled yourselves in your schooling. One, I hesitate to talk about mathematics in the Punjab, you know, where the very crucible of our modern mathematics. Set theory, container, it's all about containers. In the nursery, you learn about how you move things from one place to another, from one container to another, and you continue to develop that to counting and to organizing numbers and algebra. But the whole of mathematics is really based on set theory. In science, many of you will have struggled with the Gauss laws, probably. It's a calculation that has to be done in science. Usually it's introduced at the age of about 13, 14, and it separates a lot of children from science education and non-science education because it involves inverse proportion. It involves understanding that when you reduce the volume, the pressure increases or the temperature increases, and those relationships between the variables are inversely proportionate. Now that's a seesaw. That is a very simple scheme that we're talking about. The operation between those variables is something you can learn in preschool, and you can learn to understand and manipulate levers and simple machines, and it will serve you right the way through to your education and make you a successful physicist as well. So it's fundamental. Play provides these basic schemes. The cognitive scientists and the cognitive linguists are beginning to document how pervasive that is in all of our knowledge. Those basic building blocks, the foundations of our language and our mathematics and our science are in the nursery. So if we get that right, then the children are going to really achieve.
As an early years advocate, I think I feel that. Dr. Thompson?
Absolutely. I think already Sarah and Dr. Graus and John have mentioned some very good examples. So I'll just say that there has been this separation of knowledge or curriculum and skills and a joy of learning, which is a little artificial, because when you have play, you are completely immersed, you're completely engaged into an activity or topic that interests you. And what the research we have done with our partners illustrates is that children actually remember things for longer and much deeper when they have that curiosity and they have that opportunity to test and try out different strategies. So they better understand concepts and principles, but they're also able to take these principles or the curriculum and apply that to new kinds of problems. So I think we have separated that because sometimes we're afraid that children don't remember for the short-term tests instead of developing this positive attitude to keep learning. And it's also something that we, not necessarily is how we were taught when we were younger. So we keep kind of using our own memory of learning as a driving mechanism for our pedagogies, instead of really looking at the child and supporting their natural ways of exploring topics and interests around them.
Yes, thank you, Bo. And we can start with the next question. I think that when we were doing our pre-session, it was something that you were very passionate to talk about, which is the use of playful pedagogies relevant to older students, and why?
Yes, it's a very pertinent topic for our work, because we believe that curiosity and active forms of engagement and play is relevant for children of all ages, even adults who play with microphones and other interesting objects. That way of exploring and testing and figure out how things work is something that's integral to not only how children develop and learn, but something that we need to think about to keep being flexible and creative in our way of approaching the world. And we have studied how that works then for older children in the classroom. And it may not look like play, or we don't call it play, but when we think about forms of experiential learning, where children and students go out to explore and seek experiences in the outdoors, using places and materials in the community, that's also a form of curiosity and play, which is strengthening knowledge and skills and a joy of learning. When you build a real life physical project, like in project-based learning, or when you address a particular problem you care deeply about in problem-based learning, something that is authentic to your interests and what is in your environment around you. Or when was mentioned before, like an inquiry-based approach, where you're driven by particular questions that interest you, whether it's any aspect of environment or climate or the social relationship in your environment or things you have around you. So there are many of the practices that actually exist and are very well used across the world, but they're having a different name. It's all based on this hands-on creative approaches where you share agency and choice between the teachers, the adults, and use the environment around you. So these aspects are all about, playful forms of engagement that can be used in the curriculum, but in all across activities.
Thank you so much. Dr. Sarah, would you like to add on to that?
I think
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead. We can start with John.
in the science of learning about floating and sinking, for example. I mean, for a child who has a clearer understanding of upthrust, they've actually felt the pressure back from the water when they push a ball under the water, which they can learn with their water play in a nursery, they're going to have a much better understanding of why things float and how density. When it comes to learning about the atmosphere and pressure, if they've flown kites and talked about air that is a substance and can be trapped underwater and make bubbles, then they will have a much stronger appreciation of those science ideas later. So again, the foundations are there. And these principles are universal. They're true at every age. You know, Einstein talked about how playful his learning was. You know, it's something that applies to all of our understandings. And I think the key principle is to remember all the time, it's not the name of something, it's not the definition, it's what it does, is what you're interested in. And if you get actively involved in something, just like thinking about learning a new technology, you don't learn it by reading the manual, do you? You learn it by actually using it.
Thank you so much. I think what it also does is when we are learning by doing, it creates more and more curiosity as well, and that engages everyone, whether you're a child or an adult, more and more to learn about understanding whatever it is that we are doing. So, Dr. Sarah, let's start again.
Is it me this time? Yeah. So some of the skills that we develop through play are important for lifelong learning, and they're the kinds of things that need to be practiced. So people need the opportunities to practice. For example, thinking about with older children, if they have homework to do, or if they have to study for a test that they know is coming up in a few weeks' time, they need to make decisions. They need to plan. They need to get all the information in the right place and decide what their priorities are. All of those things are exactly what young children are practicing when they're given the opportunity to engage in these more open-ended activities, which young children have a lot more opportunities for. No matter how formal early years is, it's almost always going to have more of that playful element. So in some ways, early years educators really are the experts, I think, in this type of pedagogy, and they can share with their colleagues, how do you plan for, at least in the UK, they would plan, say, for a 6-week period, broadly planning, this is in early years, some topics, etc. But then within that, they're very responsive to what comes up during the day, and they work, they give the children quite a lot of freedom. If you fast forward 10 years, it doesn't look like that, right? And I think our learners in the UK are told a lot of the time what to do with their time, just very, very literally. Sit here, now go there, study this section. And then, in my opinion, the worst of it is they're even told what to say in the exam. So the entire thing takes away all of their kind of agency and opportunities to practice those higher order skills like questioning, engaging in dialogue, or self-regulation, organizing yourself. So for me, those would be kind of some of the main things we'd be missing out on if we weren't giving older learners the opportunity to be more playful in their own learning.
When I traveled before COVID, traveled the world and visited all the Kidzanias in 22 or so countries, I always made a point of meeting with young people. And the first question I always asked them was, why do you go to school? And this is not scientific, but it was a good sample over a long period of time. The answer I got was, because we have to. So at that, which is a very sad answer, isn't it, really? Yeah. So that was for me evidence that we've taken the why out of it. We have succeeded to take the why out of it, and we're left with the boring bits. Yeah. So is play and everything that goes with it relevant later on? Absolutely. We just call it, as Bo alluded to, we call it something else. Because we have to call things and we have to stick them in boxes, don't we? Otherwise, we can't cope with life. So we now call it experiential or experience-based learning. So it is the connect between the theory and the practice. It is the appliance of the science. And if you take children, why study, my daughter at school study Shakespeare's Othello. They read Othello. Why would you read Othello? Shakespeare would be turning in his grave, because Othello was there to be seen and to be enjoyed and to experience. So somehow we as teachers, those elements of play, by providing relevant experiences, in a sense often is an exemplification, but also by providing opportunities for children to metaphorically fall over and learn to get back up again. Yeah, the issue about Kidzania, the most important thing about Kidzania is that when you go inside, adults are there to be seen and not heard. That works quite well with teachers. It's a nightmare with parents, as you can imagine. But with teachers it works well. And you then ask yourself the question, where can children go these days, older children, where it's okay to make mistakes and to learn from mistakes? And the classroom is not the place, because we haven't got the time and we're too busy, and I've got 19 other children and I've got to do the marking and. So we need to look at experiential, experience-based learning linked to the curriculum as I believe, the continuation of play linked to the curriculum. Now, that's one thing. And then very quickly, I think we also underestimate what children can do. We as adults have in our mind that certain things need to happen at a certain age. We don't talk to children about their career until they're about 14. Who decided that? So I'm doing some work with an international schools group at the moment where we're looking to develop a future pathways program through experiential learning for 4 to 8-year-olds. Why would we not do that? Why would we not get 6-year-olds talking to children's authors, actually sensing the real experience, why people do things? Experience-based learning, experiential learning is the answer to the why question, and is the continuation of the play. So that takes me back to being a happier secondary school teacher, because I was allowed to work with the people who work with the very young ones.
I just noticed on the questions here, I'll try to answer some of that at the same time, really. Okay. The crucial thing for identifying the schemes, the operations that the children are using, so that the practitioner can build on it, is that the child is free to choose their own play. If they're not freely choosing their play, then you won't see what they can do. You'll see what you've told them to do instead. And the word flow is really important here. As far as I'm aware, quite independently, research by Csikszentmihalyi, a Hungarian researcher, psychologist, and research from the Froebel team, Chris Hathey and Tina Bruce in London, quite independently recognized flow in your young children. When you do allow children to freely play on their own, they show these particular schemes. They show these operations repeated over and over again. So you need some time in the classroom environment for the educator to see that. And in Montessori, a lot of these ideas are intuitively practiced. The child has a freedom to choose their activity, and the practitioner is a scientist that is actually looking at the child's play and working out what they can do to build on it, what particular activities, what particular resources that child needs to develop that play and those skills further. As I say, Montessori really got it. She had the intuitive ideas. Now we've got the science for the first time. We've got the cognitive science and the neuroscience that actually explains how it works. But it's pretty much the same principles. And then the intervention that the educator does is very light touch. Direct teaching doesn't work with young children. One of the reasons it can't possibly work is because you have to start with what the child already knows. And the diversity of what children know in the early years is much greater than other parts of education. Think for a moment of a group of 4-year-olds. Some of them are just 4, some of them are already nearly 5. That's 20% difference in life experience. That's the same as putting 16-year-olds with undergraduate 20-year-olds. You know, it's asking too much for direct class teaching. You can't, it won't work, just ineffective. You have to let them play, you have to recognize what it is that they're doing and then build on it. If a child is positioning things, give them some things that are different sizes and suggest you might want to grade those. You might want to sort them out into which one's bigger. That'll start them on the way to counting and measurement and lots of mathematical ideas. And we need to teach practitioners to recognize the schemes and also to recognize the progression that can come from the activities that the children are doing. And that's effective play-based teaching.
Absolutely. Dr. Thompson? What does learning through play look like and feel like in a classroom and school?
I think there were some great examples mentioned already. So I just want to add to that we don't see that separation between playing and school also. And I think Dr. Baker from Cambridge also have explored that in the forms of guidance. So you can still have a particular topic or curriculum that you want to drive, whether it's a Shakespeare story or it's a science activity. So you start with a story and you illustrate aspects of that story, but then you invite the children to represent that story using multiple objects through different media, through different stories, through music. So you bring to life certain aspects of that story, and you ask the children to unfold, like, how could the story end in a different way? What could be a new character? Or what is the environment that this kind of character plays out in right now? So you are still trying to frame some aspects of a topic of literacy or a science activity, when you invite children to explore and represent that environment in multiple ways, which will then cause, different forms of vocabulary, different forms of reasoning skills, different forms of collaboration. So that form of play, more like guidance that invites for a particular outcome that teachers always need to have, is being broadened, not knowledge-wise only, but to a large number of skills, but invites for that choice and agency into the classroom, where, as was mentioned here also, children can express themselves in many different ways.
Thank you. Dr. Grouse?
Thank you. Just some very brief observations, because much has already been said. The environment is the third teacher. So is our school and our classrooms learning schools and learning classrooms? Do they stimulate curiosity and thinking and activity, or are they sterile, one flew over the cuckoo's nest type of environments? Yeah, which many are. And as the young people get older, the environments tend to become more sterile, because apparently we don't need encouraging environments anymore. The environment is the online environment, and we haven't really talked about that yet. We need to treat it as yet another place and space where we can explore. And then finally, I think we need to always remember from the outset that not all classrooms have 4 walls. And that takes back to experience-based, experiential learning, i.e. play.
Absolutely. Not all classrooms are 4 walls. Dr. Baker?
So the question is, what playful learning can look like in a classroom? And I would say that it depends on which area of that educator's practice they're exploring in that moment or in that day or that term. I've seen examples where teachers feel comfortable trying out more playful talking. And it's opening a little bit of space for a discussion with the class about a topic, using open-ended questions, allowing the ideas to, build on each other, etc. So for some teachers, it's going to be playful dialogue. But for other teachers, it may be something they're trying out where they move the furniture around in their class because they want different opportunities to become available to the children. Or one of the teachers we worked with who took the chairs out, not all of them, many of the chairs out of her year 1 classroom, to see, what would the children do? Would it open up also their kind of, even physically, are they going to move more freely and not feel that they must sit down at the table? So it can look different in different classrooms, and I think it's important that people don't feel like it has to be a full-blown change to everything they do, but that there are lots of different ways that they can use playful learning.
Thank you so much. We have about 5 minutes left for question and answers from the panel, so I will begin. Does music play a role in learning through play? Anyone can take the question.
Can I just really quickly say that we need to make absolutely certain that we are collectively advocates for the arts. Yeah, the arts in schooling, as our youngsters get older, become marginalized. They become less important. We need to make sure that the enjoyment and creativity that is involved with the arts, including, of course, music, starts from the earliest of ages. And because the arts, in a sense, engage our senses in a way that very, very few other activities do. So I plead with you to make that happen.
Okay. One of the that has been identified as a very as observed often in young children is dabbing or tapping. Children will tap something, be tapping paint or a pencil or a crayon, make this pattern. Now, a skillful educator will take that interest and that scheme that the child is displaying and channel it. The most obvious way is with a xylophone, because a xylophone can be making different tapping sounds. And you can start introducing music to children, the patterns of those taps when they do it. So, yes, definitely. Music has a big part to play.
Thank you. This question I would like the panel, everyone to answer if possible. What role does technology have in learning through play? Are playing on screens part of learning through play? We can start with Dr. Baker, please.
Thank you. That's not an area of my own research, but I am aware of some research that actually several studies now have shown that some children, or I think even they've done this with adults too, who play video games, have developed their ability to pay attention to certain things really strongly. So there's a very kind of specific set of skills there that video games might support. Also, I know that lots of young people use games these days because games aren't what, like when I was their age, you would sit on your, little whatever you had, if you were lucky, by yourself. These days, a lot of them are connected to each other. So there's a very social element, I think. Again, not my area of research, but I'm certainly aware that there are some benefits to gaming.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson?
That's a fascinating topic, so I'll try to answer briefly. But the answer is that it depends, right? So we can use a phone with a certain approach of curiosity and exploration, or we can use it passively to just watch videos. So there are particular types of technology that separates our attention to what we deeply care about, separate from learning and also from playing, and that's when it's passive, when we're only viewing things, when it's only for entertainment. And we have studied that extensively with children from more than 30 countries together with UNICEF, and it's a report that just launched just a few weeks ago. And children actually care about the safety about it, the safety of online spaces, the people they meet, and how data is used. But there are also really positive ways of using technologies. And I think an example of radiomelia was mentioned before. I've seen radiomelia that use microscopes where they expand the focus of plants and imagery into bigger screens so children can better study it. Or they use a 3D printer to print models of themselves to figure out how they look like, and they can study the characteristics of the body. So when we think about technologies, what children say is, if we can use technologies to have a deeper sense of our social connections, to relate better to each other, if there are creative ways of using technology so we can express our thinking in new ways and share, like through arts or drawings or models, whether we are able to diversify the way we use technology so it doesn't become passive and linear only for entertainment. Then there are many ways to use technologies, but it needs to center around the interest and passions of child and what is in the real environment.
Thank you. I would like to ask one more question, and then we can answer both together, I guess. Also, is how can parents be convinced of the value of play-based learning? So we can talk about technology and we can talk about parents both together, because we have 1 minute left. John.
Okay. I've researched quite a lot on technology in young, so I'm not going to go through that. It'll take too long. On my website, you'll find many publications that are free to download. I tried to do that as far as possible, and you'll get the answers there. But the main thing is I'd like to say is that I'm quite skeptical about programmed learning, about children playing games in order to learn objectives that are set by a programmer who's never even met the child. I think from what I said earlier, it's fairly obvious why I'd be very skeptical about that. However, screen-based learning is really very powerful. And children, in my research, quite happily take food from an image on the screen and play with it with another partner, swap food, share it out. It becomes part of their game. Very, very cheap nowadays to get a security camera out onto a bird box outside or a bird table, a screen inside, just part of the environment, the enriched environment of the preschool. And the children will interact with that screen and with the animals that they see on it. So screen-based learning, yes, definitely. Programmed learning, no, not so sure. Parents, I think the most important thing with parents is that they believe it works. They have to see that play-based learning is more effective than other forms of learning. And that's easy to do, in fact, because it's a fact. The research shows it. Research shows it very clearly, even with very large-scale studies like the EPI project in UK. 3,000 children studied and tracked. The settings that were most effective were play-based. So, in your settings, you can prove it to parents by actually doing it and then showing that you're actually providing the outcomes that other settings don't because of it. And it does increase all the outcomes: literacy, numeracy, science, etc.
Thank you. Dr. Grass, would you like to add something?
Just two things really. Parents are co-educators, and we cannot have a discussion about educating children without bringing the parents into it, whether they like it or not, and whether we like it or not, because sometimes it's to our convenience if they stay away. We have to be honest with that. And I think if I can end with the quote from my favorite book, because it's worth reminding parents of this. My favorite book is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, and the quote is, "All grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it."
Thank you so much. That's a wonderful note to end on. Thank you, Dr. Thompson, Dr. Baker, Dr. Blatchford, and Dr. Grouse for being here today with us on this panel, and I hope everybody enjoyed. And I'm sorry I couldn't ask all the questions. We didn't have enough time, but next time, hopefully. Thank you.